Hey, what is going on, everyone? Welcome back to MTech, that channel dedicated to owning and maintaining this high mileage hero. Your eyes down to see if you read the title right. I've owned this car for 2 years, put a little over 20,000 miles on it, and have spent about $20,000, which, if you are a finance expert, probably rather foolishly, except that I am a finance major in college. Coming over here, I actually just realized that I lost a center cap. I bought a center cap off of eBay and totally just flew out on the drive here, which is rather unfortunate. Anyway, enough about the center cap. Over the past 2 years I've owned this car, I've learned that BMWs are very weird cars. What do I mean by that? I mean that they have their set of issues and problems, but once you fix them, the drivetrain can definitely take a beating and be pretty reliable. This car is over 242,000 miles and the motor is in really good shape. Without going into all the problems I've encountered with this car, a few of those problems are the cooling system. I secured the oil pump nut via the wire tie mod. I replaced various vacuum lines, old rubber hoses and things, and a lot of parts that are just either bad design to the factory or they just went out due to age and mileage. This car has also stranded me a total of 3 times, but in the car's defense, only 2 of those times were actually the car's fault. We will talk about those things today. So after I bought this car, I fixed a few small issues. I did a hood latch cable because the original one broke. It needed a drive shaft guibo. And of course, I did the cooling system as a preventative measure. Unfortunately for me though, the cooling system leaked after I got it back, which I learned the hard way. One day I walked inside, and then when I came back out, the temp needle was almost to the red, giving me a head gasket scare, not even 6 months into my ownership of this car. I finally fixed that issue this winter, which I want to say is fairly recently, only a couple months ago. The reason it took me so long is because I just kept chasing hose clamps down the line. I started with the upper radiator hose, and I did a couple others, and I finally made it to the reservoir, and I ended up just warranting the reservoir, which I didn't need to because it was actually just the hose. That's a whole story. What I should have did was from the start just pull it all back out, retighten everything, put it back together. But I didn't do that because I spent $650 on shop labor, and I was so dead bent on not pulling everything back apart. This was also one of the reasons the car stranded me. I was out and about, and one of the coolant hoses, the upper radiator hose, actually backed off, dumping coolant everywhere. That time the car did not overheat because I caught it basically immediately, but it left coolant stains all over the engine and the road, and I had to go buy a gallon of coolant. That kind of sucked. With the cooling system out of the way, I went through the whole car, replaced a bunch of different filters, and changed all the fluids. And I can tell you, I have a really good understanding as to why E36 owners never do their cabin air filters. That is because that job sucks. I actually broke the glove box light when doing it, which is a super bummer. I was really upset with myself about that. That is something I'm going to do this summer, is fix the glove box light and maybe the glove box itself. I at least owe it to the world to fix that damn glove box light because it was totally original before I messed with it. Then again, that cabin air filter may have also been original, so you see that how you see fit. I then decided to do the glass headlight mod because I wet sanded a little bit too hard on my original stock plastic headlights. And let me tell you, the glass headlight mod on E36s is a total and complete rabbit hole. Nobody knows anything about it, and those that do won't tell you because they're either too lazy or they're playing a sick prank on the rest of us, allowing us to spend the same countless hours they did searching through forums, old BMW manuals, and of course incorrect pin combinations, until you eventually decide to just pull the headlights apart and chase all the wires to see where they go. When my buddy Connor decides to do this mod on his M3, I'm going to make a full and in-depth DIY on how to do the glass headlights, depot ones specifically, on these cars because I would not like to see anyone waste as much time as I did and finally put the forum questions to rest. I see a Facebook post probably every other day asking about how to do this mod. Then after the headlight mod, I started chasing down oil leaks. We had a oil filter housing gasket leak, valve cover gasket leak, rear main seal leak, and then eventually we got to the oil pan gasket with the oil pump nut wire tie mod like I mentioned earlier. And about 6-7 months into my ownership, I went ahead and fixed this fender right here, and there was a tiny rust spot starting on the door seal up here, which I wanted to fix so it didn't get any worse, and that made me like the car a lot more because the fender was very obviously kinked here before, and there was a massive dent right there. Moving on from the fender and door over there, I then decided to chase down the ABS light, which the car had when I bought it, and that was part of why I bought it for less than $6,000 after selling the parts it came with. and the ABS light wound up just being the relay in the fuse box over there, which is one of the few times I actually got really lucky with the repairs of this car. But my luck would eventually run out because late into the first winter of owning this car, I'm going to say around January or February, the alternator and battery failed simultaneously. This would be the second time the car stranded me. I was in right before an intersection, and I kind of knew that the alternator was taking a conk out on me because all my lights started dimming. I was only half a mile away from my house, and I decided, I'll just try and make it home. And, well, didn't make it. Please recall, Dad came out, jumped me, and then I drove the half mile home, ordered a battery, and then got an alternator and threw them both in the car. At this point, my parents were bringing up the idea of selling the car because I was still at a break-even point, especially with values on the rise, but I really didn't want to. I had a mission with this car, I had a build I wanted to achieve, and I had not made it there yet. Fast forward a couple months to April of 2021, almost at the 1 year point of ownership of this car. I was pulling into a Best Buy parking lot, and I decided to operate the clutch pedal. This proved to be a very fatal mistake because when I pushed the clutch pedal in, it did not come back up. And even worse than it not coming back up, I started seeing brake fluid being dumped all over the floor. Fortunately, the $20 WeatherTech floor mats I bought turned out to be one of the best investments I ever made, and it completely saved my carpet. This was the third time the car had stranded me, and I got it towed to a shop that I was already discussing at doing my rear suspension overhaul with at the time. Leaving a lot of the details out, a clutch master cylinder turned into a clutch, then into tie rods, then into a steering rack, and it was there for 2 months, cost me $3,000, and was an overall miserable experience. I missed my graduation, I missed a lot of car events, and I missed my 1 year anniversary of this car, which I was super disappointed about. Fast forward to April of 2021, almost at the 1 year point of ownership of this car, I was pulling into a Best Buy parking lot, and I decided to operate the clutch pedal as one does in a car with a manual transmission. And it proved to be a fatal mistake because when I pushed the clutch pedal in, it did not come back up. But not only did it not come back up, I started seeing brake fluid being dumped all over the floor. Fortunately, my $20 WeatherTech floor mats wound up being the best investment I probably ever made on this car and completely saved my carpet. This would be the third time this car had stranded me, and I got the car towed to a shop that I was already discussing my rear suspension overhaul with to get an estimate and get it fixed. Leaving a lot of the details out with that experience I had with the shop, a clutch master cylinder turned into a clutch job, then into tie rods, then into a steering rack. It was a miserable experience. The car was there for 2 months, cost me over $3,000, and I missed a lot of events in this car. My graduation, I missed a lot of senior events I wanted to bring the car to, I missed a lot of car meets. It was really disappointing. Then in June, shortly after I started driving my car again, I had signed up for a track day at Waterford Raceway. Unfortunately though, the car must have been a little bit shy because the check engine light came on and it started running poorly a day before the track day. I then scanned the car and I got the dreaded codes P1188, P1189. If you want to know more about how I fixed that, click up here. But to make a long story short about the P1188, P1189 code set, if you get these codes, it is kind of the kiss of death for your wallet. It can be anything from bad gas to vacuum leak, failed injectors, whatever. You never know. I naively at the time didn't know this. I had been having a cold start issue prior, and I knew that my ICV was clogged, so I had actually had a bunch of vacuum hoses and a CCV sitting around. So what I did that night at about 4 p.m., I set out to fix the car a day before the track day. To make a long story short, at 2 to 3 a.m., I was still up working in the car. I couldn't get the ICV to sit back in properly, and I eventually just decided to go to bed and fix it the next morning. I then woke up at like 8 or 9 a.m., started working on the car. Miraculously, I got it fixed. And then I started driving to the track day, and about 10 minutes into my drive, I started losing cylinders. Let me tell you, S52s running on 5 and 4 cylinders sound very funny. I somehow made it to the shop, had them diagnose what the issue was. They said bad O2s. They replaced the O2s, and then the car ran fine. Although I will say it did feel a little bit funny. More on that later. For the rest of the summer, after the check engine light incident, the car was actually pretty reliable. But since I can't stand to have this car running and driving for more than 2 months at a time, I decided to go ahead and do my rear suspension overhaul. The car was then at the shop for another month. Fortunately, this time, it was due to part shortages and delays that were not in the realm of the shop, and they were very professional about it, and I walked out of that with a great experience. And of course, the biggest smile I've had on my face since buying this car. I say this all the time, but I cannot tell you guys enough how much of a difference the rear suspension overhaul made for the ride quality and the handling of this car. It is just fantastic. And it was by far the best dollars I have ever spent on this car total. It was about $3,800. I would do it again. I friggin' love it. Coming back to the clutch and transmission, my dreaded transmission issue presented itself again, and the car was back in the shop. 1 trades later and everything new again, and the transmission bell housing. The car was finally sorted and back on the road. I still have a sinking suspicion that the first shop that did my clutch job did something to mess up the trans, because after I'd gotten it back, it never really shifted right. It always just kind of felt off. After sorting that out, we did a $600 set of brakes, $400 set of front tires, and lo and behold, we found the source of my P1188 and P1189 codes. Surprise! It was a valve cover gasket, which is something I had already done. It was causing a really bad vacuum leak, and of course it was my fault because I didn't torque the valve cover down in the proper order. Because who was I to know that BMW has an order for putting your valve cover bolts back on? Jokes aside, most cars are like that. I actually was just very bad at working on cars, and I'm still not that great now, but I at least now know there's an order to the valve cover bolts, so that's a job I can do reliably. Now, we are here today, and the car runs like a top. We're getting ready for a track day in a week. I shortened this video a lot for the sake of runtime. I'm sure this video is pretty long as it is, but to make it short, I spent $20,000. I've been stranded 3 times, and I've put probably well over 100 hours in wrenching time on this car. The past 2 years of me owning this car has really been the story of my entry into the car hobby. See, if I hadn't done all these things, if I hadn't experienced, doing a valve cover gasket incorrectly or having a poor experience with the shop, then I wouldn't have learned any of these issues. It's almost better that I did it now, and instead of spending, $10,000 later on a more expensive car, I spent $3,000 on a transmission. And for that reason, I'm not upset about any of the money I spent on this car. I am super upside down, but I don't really plan on selling it. And truth be told, I've now learned a lot of these things. So when I go buy an E39 M5, or maybe I go buy an 8 Series or a Lamborghini or whatever I do someday, I have now learned the lessons on a cheaper, less expensive car that I can now apply to everywhere in the car hobby. On a side note though, I do have a really good understanding of the built versus bought debate. Not that I'm going to have like the whole ego I think it's kind of toxic mindset of I built my car. But I do kind of understand where a lot of that comes from now. It definitely takes a lot of effort to research everything and build a car. So with some regular maintenance, I can now own and enjoy this car for years to come. Part of long-term ownership on one of these cars, or any car, not just the BMW, is owning it and maintaining it, keeping up on the maintenance. See, I bought a car with 222,000 miles and no paperwork, so naturally it had a lot of deferred maintenance. Part of the reason I've done so much work to it is because I've had to do 5 to 10 years worth of maintenance in 2 years. So it is going to sound like a lot. So with that aside, let us answer the big question. Are BMWs reliable? Joking aside, here's the thing. If you need to ask that question, the answer is no. This car is an E36, but a lot of these older BMWs are in the same boat. For most people, the time of daily driving these is over. Newsflash, 2015 was 7 years ago. This car was 1297 production date. That is almost 25 years old, a quarter of a century. Sure, maybe 10 years ago, these made good daily drivers. But here's the thing. These cars are now so old and they've had so many owners, I shouldn't, and you definitely shouldn't trust any recently bought aging BMW to be your means of, getting around and living your life. Especially one without paperwork like this one was. I'm still going to daily drive this car for the summer because it is my only car and I currently can't afford to have anything else. But that's because I own this car. I have the paperwork for it. I trust it enough to get me around where I need to go. But as soon as I can, as soon as I can manage, this car is going to become a weekend car. I think a lot of people looking at buying older cars like this, they don't realize what they're in for. And if it's your only car, it can get pretty ugly. It used to be that you could just buy one for $10,000, maybe do a little bit of work to it or just, change some fluids, keep it nice, and you could just drive it forever. That's not really the case anymore. But most of the media will still tell you that you can buy one of these for 15 grand. Go drive it trouble-free. You don't have to do any work to it. When that really isn't the case. And people that haven't owned an older car like this, they have no frame of reference, or even high schoolers like me, they just go out and buy one and think it's going to be fine. I mean, I really thought that $8,000 ago, this car would have been perfect. So now you guys know my full 2-year ownership story of this car. I really hope you enjoyed the video. I know my story has been a bit more eventful than most, but all things considered, the car has treated me well and I really enjoyed my ownership of it. If you want to see more BMW E36 or just car content in general, make sure to like, subscribe, and also make sure to share this video with your friends, especially if one of them is looking at a BMW with over 200,000 miles. Maybe they need to see this video to see what awaits them, and then maybe they can have a better understanding of whether they really want to own one of these cars or not. Comment down below if you have any questions or comments, and take care, everyone. I'll see you in the next one.